Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back to ANN, Anderson News Network. My name is Val McNeil, and we have some breaking news for you. Today we'll hear from some of the most influential people in some of the most major events of our time. In this includes Bleeding Kansas, the Brooks Sumner incident, the presidential election of 1856, and the Dred Scott case. Let's begin with Bleeding Kansas. We'll go to Daly on the scene.
Thanks, Val. Bleeding Kansas was a period of irrational killings that took place from 1854 to 1859. This was fought between pro-slavery advocates and abolitionists for the control of Kansas and their slavery policies, and things got very violent from both sides. Shockingly, the national government did not get involved. I'm here at the anti-slavery capital, so let's hear from a Northerner first. Hello, Northerner. Tell us about your experience in Kansas.
Early on, the population of Kansas was primarily Northerners who were against slavery. This was good because due to the Kansas-Nebraska Act, popular sovereignty decides slavery issue in territories. So since there were more of us, Northerners, it looked like Kansas was going to be a free state.
So what was the problem?
Well, since the residents of Kansas would ultimately determine if it was a free state or slave state, those Southerners supporting slavery began to come into Kansas as well because they wanted it to be a slave state. We were upset about this, and it gave rise to conflict soon after.
What kind of conflict?
Southerners began to forcibly enter my town, Lawrence, destroying everything they touched from hotels to newspaper offices. They looted, destroyed homes, and killed 2 men, my friends. I was extremely distraught about the trauma we endured.
Wow.
I fully blame the Southern Democrats for the horrors of Bleeding Kansas. They attacked us brutally and unfairly to support a corrupt and immoral practice. I firmly believe that Kansas should be a free state because as a Northerner, I feel that slavery is wrong and is not essential to commerce, which is more important to our economy, in my opinion. I don't want power to be shifted in government or in the Electoral College to give slave states more power. So I believe we had to take matters into our own hands to keep slavery out of Kansas, since the national government seems to be refusing to get involved.
Did you Northerners fight back? Thanks for your time, Northerner. Now let's move to the pro-slavery capital of Kansas, Lecompton, and hear from a Southerner. Hello, Southerner. We just heard from a Northern anti-slavery advocate here in Kansas about the horrors of Bleeding Kansas. Did they contribute to this violence too, or was it all the fault of the Southern pro-slavery advocates?
Bleeding Kansas was their fault too. After we attacked the Northern anti-slavery advocates at Lawrence, John Brown, who thought that he was called by God to end slavery, led a party to get back at us for our attacks. He killed 5 men and forced their families to watch. Chaos and violence are spreading throughout Kansas.
Wow, that sounds awful. So why do you want Kansas to be a slave state?
Slavery is essential to make agricultural as profitable as possible. Without it, I can't make as much money. And Kansas is in the South already, so shouldn't it be a slave state?
Okay, well thanks for your time today, Southerner. Val, back up to you.
Moving on to another pressing topic, we will visit the Brooks Sumner incident and the reasoning behind it. Here, we will bring you the real details of the incident, and we see our first look into the story with Daly.
Thanks, Val. We're here on the scene with Senator Charles Sumner of Massachusetts regarding the conflict that broke out recently on the Senate floor. We now know this as the Brooks-Sumner incident. I'm here with Charles Sumner, who just hours ago was assaulted with a cane by fellow Congressman Preston Brooks. Thanks for being here, Charles. We have a few questions for you regarding what happened. The conflict broke out as a result of your recent speech, The Crime Against Kansas. What did you specifically say to make Brooks react this way?
As I spoke out against the South regarding their affiliation with slavery, I declared my clear opposition toward Andrew Butler, who was the uncle of Congressman Preston Brooks, and so these statements were taken as insults and caused Brooks to have a violent reaction.
What were your motives behind saying these statements in the first place?
Well, I'm a Massachusetts anti-slavery Republican, and I was addressing the Senate on whether Kansas should be admitted to the Union as a slave state or a free state. And I believe that Democratic Senator Andrew Butler is one of the major advocates of admission of Kansas as a slave state. So,
what injuries did you suffer?
I was knocked unconscious by the trauma of the cane's impact on my head, and I will probably take my time recovering and do not expect to return to the Senate for at least another 3 years. Hopefully I'll be able to resume my duties for as long as previously intended.
Thank you for your time today, Charles, and sharing your perspective on this recent incident. Now back to our anchor Val in the studio.
This just in, we've received news that Brooks has agreed to a last-minute interview to present his side of the story.
Thank you for coming in on such short notice, Brooks, to share your perspective on the scene.
No problem. I'm glad to speak on something I feel so strongly about.
Okay, now that we've heard from Sumner, let's get your side of the story. What about Sumner's speech offended you?
Well, he mocked my uncle's stance as a man of chivalry, saying that he supports slavery, even going so far as to say that he calls it his mistress. He also went on to call my uncle an imbecile, which struck me as very offensive.
So why'd you choose to attack him specifically with a cane?
After his speech, I no longer see him as a respectable man, so he is not worthy of a duel with me.
After learning of the severity of his injuries, though, do you regret your decision or feel any guilt?
I stand by my actions because I strongly believe that it was necessary in order to protect my family's name and our beliefs.
Thank you, Preston, for your time. That concludes our interviews for the Brooks Sumner incident. Tune in next time for a segment on the presidential election of 1856.
Next, ANN presents daily reporting on the subject of the current campaigns for presidency. Let's hear from what the people have to say about this election.
Thanks, Val. Today we are going to discuss the upcoming presidential election of 1856, and we will hear the northern and southern perspectives regarding the three candidates. We will hear from the northern commentator first.
As a Republican from the North, we ran our first presidential campaign in 1856. I believe that Fremont should win the election of 1856 because he has abolitionist views. In my opinion, most people need to realize that slavery should come to an end. Republicans called for the repeal of the hated Kansas-Nebraska Act, which was the opposition to the extension of slavery in the territories for internal improvement projects. Since Buchanan won this election, our badly divided nation is destined for a weak leadership.
So now for the southern opinion.
Since Buchanan made it clear that if the Republicans were to win, it would bring a civil war, which will lead to the downfall of our nation, I, along with other Democrats, believe in popular sovereignty approach to slavery expansion. I want Buchanan to win because his political views and opinions on slavery are similar to mine, as slavery benefits the economy.
For our last segment on today's news, we head outside the courthouse to discuss the controversial Dred Scott case with a live interviewer with our reporter Daly.
I'm here outside the courthouse reporting on the case of Dred Scott. It was just found out that after several years, the Supreme Court ruled that all African Americans, whether free or slave, are not American citizens and cannot sue on the federal court. The court also ruled that Congress lacked power to ban slavery in the U.S. territories. This case and its decision outraged abolitionists and further heightened the tensions between the North and the South. Today we are joined with Dred Scott to get his insight on this issue. Dred, I have some questions for you. Can you give a brief explanation of your argument to the Supreme Court regarding your freedom?
I believe that if slavery is outlawed in one state, any slaves living in that state should be legally entitled to their freedom.
So why do you believe the Supreme Court ruled against your freedom?
One of the major arguments was given by Roger Brooke Taney, the Chief Justice, who ruled that I cannot be a citizen or have become free by traveling north of Missouri Compromise Line. Taney made the final decision that slavery could not be banned in the territory.
Thank you for taking the time to be here today and telling us about your experience as a result of the Supreme Court's ruling. I'm Daly, reporting live on the Dred Scott case. Now let's go back to Val at the studio.
That's all for today on Anderson News Network. Thank you for tuning in on the recent events of Bleeding Kansas, the Brooks Sumner incident, the presidential election, and the Dred Scott case. I'm your anchor, Val McNeil. See you tomorrow afternoon for more reports on this week's program.